before we go into the session, I'm of course the moderator, so I will be asking all kinds of questions. But just to make this very clear, I'm also a litigant in court. In fact, the first ever petition which was filed against the IT rules was by The Wire, and I was a co-petitioner. Therefore, you all know where I stand on this. But nevertheless, let's first welcome Apar and Namrata, and we will start with introductory remarks from both of you, and then we'll move into the questions. Apar, you want to start?
Thank you so much, Danya. And by way of disclosure, I work at an organization which has also supported strategic litigation in 2 cases, which have resulted in orders. And I just want to quickly recap on what the IT rules are to set a foundation to the conversation which will follow. And also what is the litigation, which I think can be picked up by Namrata, Venu, you, all of us together. So in a sense, the IT rules were made towards the end of February this year, and it expanded the role of government in terms of oversight and censorial powers towards firstly social media platforms and significant social media platforms. That's in part 2. And in part 3, this was a new basis of regulation which was extended towards online digital publishers and online video curated platforms. The former being platforms such as the News Minute or The Wire, and the latter being online streaming services like Netflix, Hotstar. So if one looks at the IT rules and the scope and ambit of the governance which is sought to be achieved, now we may disagree that what is the type of governance and the form of it, but it encompasses more or less the sum total of our online activity, if you leave out certain other areas which are also prominent. But for a lot of people, this constitutes the public sphere of discussion. This constitutes how culture will be determined, and that's why it's very intrinsically linked to our fundamental rights. However, this seriousness with which this needs to be approached does not seem to be reflected in the way the regulation has been devised, because it's been done not through an act of parliament, through considered legislative debate, but has been done through an executive notification under the Information Technology Act. And there are at present close to 18 petitions, or even more than them, in different high courts all over India, which are challenging the wires of these rules. And lawyers usually say the rules are ultra vires the Parent Act. And just to break it down, what this means is that essentially that these rules which have been made by executive notification do not have a legal basis to stand on. They have just been made by the central government without having any kind of legal backing under the IT Act, specifically Section 79. And this is most prominently with respect to part 3 of the rules, which with respect to online digital news media platforms and online video curated platforms. There are 3 cases which have led to significant orders, and I think possibly we can discuss this later on. And they reveal interesting insights. They have offered some form of relief to online news media publishers, but they underscore that the government is approaching a very well-needed regulatory conversation with haste, and also with aggregating a large amount of control and censorial power, which is not towards the end objectives of public utility in digital media and digital conversations.
Sure. Thanks, Apar. Namrata, what are your thoughts on the digital media rules? As Apar said, it's an executive decision taken. If you could also speak about the fact that these rules do not just talk about news organizations, but I believe that the ambit is much bigger. They speak about anyone who does news online. So is the government looking to cover a larger base of even individuals who may be covering news on any online platform?
I think, so like Apar mentioned, the rules travel far beyond the parent legislation. And when we talk about the kind of news curators or news publishers that it is trying to govern, it is definitely going far beyond the ambit of what the IT Act envisages. In fact, the argument often is that it doesn't envisage regulation of digital news media at all. Doing that would have to be done through parliamentary debate and through legislation and not through the rules. So I do think, to answer your question, that it is consolidating the government's control over online content in a big way. And this applies equally to journalists, to digital news media very problematically as a fourth pillar of democracy, and also to everyday use of online communication, to any kind of free expression where, as Apar mentioned, now online platforms are a kind of civic space. So in that sense, the rules do kind of contribute to shrinking civic spaces. And I think there are two elements broadly, very broadly speaking, two areas that the rules cover. One is content governance and the other is expansion of surveillance and data retention. So on content governance, again, both directly impact, I think, digital news media and journalism, apart from the general harms they do to right to privacy and free expression. But on the content governance piece, the biggest issue is that there's a new grievance redressal mechanism at the top of which is the government. And this is something that is very problematic against international human rights law, which squarely says that we should reject any kind of system where government agencies, instead of judicial bodies, become the arbiters of free expression. So, and the second is, again, the scope of the parent legislation. The second area that I spoke about, surveillance and data retention, relates to traceability, right? So even in the specific context of digital news media, just a little quick background on traceability, what that section in the rules requires is that there platforms like WhatsApp, like Signal, significant social media intermediaries that we use for messaging, that they should develop the ability to trace the first originator of a message. This means that they attach a kind of identifier to any message that travels on the platform so that it becomes easy to discern who is sending what, which is fundamentally against encryption. And we can talk about that in more detail later. But I think this also speaks to the general ecosystem harm to news delivery, to journalism, right? Before we see news online or on television or on newspapers, there's a lot of communication happening between journalists and their sources or internally. And I think encrypted platforms are vital to even making sure that we have an open news, open information exchange system in the country. So in that sense, I think that also, in addition to the general harm, there's a very specific harm to the digital news media industry as well.
Okay, thank you, Namrata. Apar, so one of the contentions which everyone has raised through various petitions, like you said, almost 18 petitions across different high courts, is that in the haste to bring this law, all news websites or news organizations, digital news organizations, have been classified as intermediaries. We are not intermediaries, is what we have been telling the court, right? Now, one question that I am asked often whenever I speak against the digital rules is that why should it not be applicable to digital media? There's no control over them, but there is something which the television channels, or there is a code of ethics which television channels and newspapers follow. So why not for digital? That's the question which people continuously ask us. What is your reply to that, Apar?
I think the objection which quite often is there to the IT rules is not to a system of governance by itself. It is to this system of governance, which is aggregating power at the ministerial level, which I think a lot of people who, if they would be better educated about how the rules work, would understand that the digital news publishers who have approached court are not stating that there is an absence of need for regulation today, but they're saying that under the IT Act, there is the system which is being developed is extra legal, because and there's reflection which you find with respect to these arguments in the order of the High Court of Bombay, which is in AGIG promotion of 191A Media Private Limited versus Union of India, and that's also clubbed with a petition by Nikhil Wagle. And essentially the objections in that petition are on rules 9, 14, and 16 of the IT rules, and the court agrees with the assertions made by counsels under Rule 9.1 and Rule 9.3. Let me just say what these are. The 9.1 rule relates to the code of ethics itself, which is annexed and is obligated to be complied by any digital news media platform. And if you look at the code of ethics, which is appended as an annexure to the digital news media ethics rules by itself, it has references to the Press Council of India, to the Cable Television Regulations Act, as well as I think 2 other sources of rules which will be now applicable to online news media platforms. The Bombay High Court looks at this closely and says that essentially, firstly, the PCI's journalistic code of ethics apply in a moral, without a legal force. They are much more in terms of a moral instruction. In terms of the Cable Television Regulations Act, it says it has an independent adjudicatory body. And it says that
Are we saying, no, so Apar, are we saying that if we look at the Press Council of India rule of ethics rule and what the cable TV rules say, the government interference in both those are considerably lesser than what we have in the digital rules?
I would say no. I would say that if you look at the cable, especially, yes, with respect to the Press Council of India, because it's also it's a distinct body which sometimes does hear complaints in certain other forms of contraventions under the PCI Act, right? But those rules by themselves, which are referred within the appendix, are not binding. The second, with respect to cable television regulation, I would say that there are very, very severe consequences. It's just that they're not in the cases where complaints are quite often made applied. We see a proliferation of hate speech today on television broadcast news, and we need to ask ourselves if this is the right way and mechanism of enforcement, which we need to also now take towards the digital media ecosystem, because the core fault is in Rule 9.3. I'll just quickly wrap this up. It says that at the very top tier in terms of adjudication, what sits is the ministry itself, which acts on the basis of recommendations which are made to it by an interministerial committee which is set up. So what happens more or less is that the ministry, which is the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, which itself may be the subject of journalism. Certainly, if you open the newspapers, it's the central government which occupies the greatest space in terms of journalistic scrutiny. But what happens is that if it also becomes the censor directly and has powers independent of the blocking rules, also arguably towards issuing emergency directions towards blocking, that's a very high censorial power, which is why the Bombay High Court has stayed rules 9.1 and 9.3. And this has also been reaffirmed in the petitions before the Madras High Court and DM Krishna and Digital News Publishers. So this is more or less something which has been now also judicially recognized. It's not only Digital News Publishers saying it, these are constitutional judgments in terms of interim orders passed by high courts.
Okay. Namrata, I want to just shift the focus a bit. Now, when we speak about the digital rules, there's always the mention about what happens in news industry. For example, I run a news organization. What is the cost on me even to run a grievance a redressal forum or have an officer? In fact, for one article that we wrote, it was an interview of a rationalist, we got 35 complaints. So we had to write back to all 35 of the complainants. The grievance officer has to do that. And if the rules hadn't been stayed, then this month we would have to give a report to the ministry. That's what the rules say. But I want to look at this from the perspective of the consumer, of the reader, or the person who watches news or who consumes OTT platforms. How are these rules going to affect the consumer?
I think one big negative impact is that the sheer array and diversity of information that the consumer currently has available on their fingertips, on any news forum, on digital news forums, on social media platforms, that will be reduced significantly, because there are two things that happen, right? One is takedown orders and content being taken down because government agencies are overstepping and asking for content that should stay online to be removed. But the second is also the effect that it has on smaller outfits that don't have the capacity or the resources to incur compliance costs. There might be a risk of overcompliance. When you are facing the kind of liabilities that you're facing, the incentives differ. There might be some who refuse to or refrain from publishing certain kinds of information and news pieces simply because the costs that may follow are too high. So I think in that sense, it disincentivizes diversity of opinion. and free sharing of information. And there also one more relevant thing is that fake news is one of the biggest justifications that is coming forth as a reason for implementing these rules. And that in itself is very problematic, right? Because there is no agreement on what fake news is. And we have several statements from UN special rapporteurs and otherwise saying that we cannot base legislations that interfere with fundamental rights on this amorphous concept of fake news. So for that to be one of the central bases of these kind of rules is in itself problematic. And second, it also runs the risk of capturing within its fold a lot of information that is in fact that the people have a right to, right? It may capture news pieces that are in the form of opinions but are unpopular. So in that sense, there is also a very clear and legitimate power that the government then gets to demand that certain information be taken down. And then there's the timelines, right? There is 24 hours for certain types of content, 36 hours, and even the longest for providing assistance to law enforcement is 72 hours, which is very, very short. Which again ties in with the possibility of over-compliance, because I simply may not have the capacity to get back on this complaint within 24 hours. So let me just remove it anyway. So as an end result, as a consumer, I don't have the information that I had available to me before these rules were enforced.
Okay, so we have Mr. Venu joining us. Welcome, Mr. Venu. So my first question, of course, you can add your remarks to, is that we have been speaking about this for quite a few months now. And Apar and Amrita have spoken about the legalities, about other issues, but what are the politics really behind bringing these rules in? And do you believe that at some point of time that this could even go to the parliament, that they may try to bring an act?
Well, Dhanya, the politics behind this is very clear, and it has been clear from day one. This government has, with a brute majority in parliament, their attitude, as it were, they pay lip service to democracy. They pay lip service to nurturing institutions, but all their legislations, all their actions on the ground show that they're doing exactly the opposite. They cannot. They have shown no signs of nurturing any of these institutions, media being one of them, democratic institutions, and they have shown signs of not signs. They've shown very clear tendency to be intolerant of dissent, and this is manifested in various ways. Media, in my view, Dhanya, they were in the first term, Mr. Modi did not really go after the media, but after the second term, 2019 elections, they had a very clearly laid out agenda, and we all know what the agenda was, and that agenda included. I'm talking about the politics of this whole thing. They had to push through a lot of things, which included the Citizenship Amendment Act, which included the reading down of Article 370, which included pushing through laws which were not necessarily discussed in Parliament, farm laws, etc., not properly discussed either in parliamentary committees or properly discussed in Parliament. Now, to do all this, the media was very much part of the instrument for debating many of these big political decisions. Now, my reading is that this government found the media very, very inconvenient, especially digital media and social media, in the way it gave a huge pushback to Citizenship Amendment Act. Even during the farm laws, you saw how intolerant this government became, and they started filing criminal cases against activists, etc. So all this is then a part of the background. Now, so they decided at some point during COVID, they thought the period of COVID was a very convenient time for them to devise these new laws through which they could muzzle the media, muzzle dissent. So and they just went ahead and did something which I entered journalism in the early 80s. I have participated when Rajiv Gandhi in the late 80s brought a press censorship bill. Then there were 300 journalists who protested and marched down this boat club and went to before Parliament House, and there were editors like Enram, Arun Shourie, and reporters. All the entire media came together in opposing those bill, and the bill had to be withdrawn. Now, I actually saw an exact repeat of that, a blatant attempt to muzzle the media and this time, of course, at that time, social media didn't exist, internet did not exist. The context this time context was different, but the political muzzling dissent and muzzling media was the common factor this time, as it was in the late 80s. And the only thing the difference, Danya, that I saw this time was media was not united. Now, I want to say this because you and I have discussed this when we went to court. We were the first to go to court. Because at that time, media was not fragmented like it is today. At that time, there was not even television in the way that we have television channels today, like 300 channels. So at that time, the whole the idea and the consensus was very clear that this was the clear attempt at basically attempt at assaulting media freedom, assaulting freedom of expression, and everybody was convinced, and everybody was very clear in the head that Article 19, which gives us the right to freedom of expression, was being violated, was being muzzled. So this time also we have that article. Our whole all the petitions, the 18 plus petitions, they talk about Article 19. They talk about press freedom, and the latest Madras High Court stay order which came last week, very clearly says that the government cannot create an oversight mechanism for media. Government does not have the legal basis for doing it. Only a judicial body can determine whether Article 19 is being violated, right? Freedom of expression. So suddenly this government has taken all these rights through a subordinate legislation, and here we are. Everybody has challenged. The entire media has challenged different sections of media, whether it is DNPA or whether it's News Broadcasters Association and others. But I have not seen the same kind of movement that we had in the late 80s this time. Although people are challenging, belatedly challenged the online, the news media laws as totally violative of the Constitution and totally removing all safeguards for freedom of expression. But unfortunately, as we have discussed, media is fragmented. The traditional media took about 3 months, as you know, Danya. We had gone to the to Delhi High Court very early on, but these people were negotiating with the government, thinking that some via media could be found, But as you know, the attitude of this government, no via media was found, and they got a rap on the knuckles, and then finally they decided to go to court, and at least now we have at least 2 good stay orders, one from Bombay High Court, one from Madras High Court, very clearly stating that Rule 9 is violative of prima facie violative of freedom of expression. Government cannot decide what content media should carry or not carry. Government cannot remove content, online content, without informing the publisher. And the oversight mechanism, which I think most shocking, some 9 joint secretary bureaucrats, 7-8 joint secretaries sitting and telling media what it should write and what it should not, trying to act as super editors. Patently illegal, patently unconstitutional. I think the stay orders depict that, and I think the government today is on the defensive. It is highly embarrassed, and when it is taken up by the Supreme Court They've gone to the Supreme Court for bunching up all the petitions. But I think the developments so far, in my view, are very, very positive for the media, whether it is the Madras High Court stay, Bombay High Court stay, or the Kerala High Court stay for News, Television Broadcasters Association, or the original Kerala High Court stay which Live Law got. I think the general consensus.
Yeah. I'll just interrupt here.
Yeah. So
before going to Apar, I just want to make one point from what Mr. Venu said. I mean, it is of disappointment that the media is fragmented. In fact, just to make it clear, the big media houses did not want to challenge the law. They did try to negotiate with the union government. They, in fact, wrote to them saying that since our television channels or print publications are part of a code of ethics under the Press Council or under the Cable TV Act, even our digital should be under that and not under the digital media rules. But the government did not oblige. It said, no, even your websites will come under the digital media rules. It is only then that the big media houses decided to go to court. I really wish that they showed the courage even just when the rules were announced, calling out the government, saying that this is against freedom of expression. Apart, one thing I want to ask you, though you and Mr. Venu have said that the stays from the high courts, from various high courts, do look quite positive. The whole framing of this dialogue, right? Like this, that this is the government trying to do something about fake news. In fact, from that infamous press conference, which Ravi Shankar Prasad and Javadekar had, both no longer ministers, but the narrative was that this is against fake news, this is against child sexual abuse. And even recently, I think the Supreme Court did say that there is a concern about fake news. So if the government positions it like that, then what happens?
See, here's the thing. We've often noticed, and there's been a gradual approach of governments globally, not only in India, of applying and utilizing existing social concerns and approaching that through a system of regulation which increases authoritarian power. And one looks at the dictionary definition of authoritarian, it means centralized power without any checks and balances, essentially. In a democratic framework, what is needed are digital rights, user rights, in which you deepen the 19(1)(a) requirement, because the public has the right to receive information and knowledge and then also disagree with it. Now, of course, fake news by itself, certain categories of it, such as intentional disinformation, which may stray into forms of hate speech, requires efficient enforcement. But all forms of fake news will not actually require regulation. People may already get a sense this is a very complex dialogue requiring a very deft handling of civil liberties as well as the larger digital ecology, given that nobody's happy with how social media is right now, irrespective of where they stand on the political spectrum. The second issue I'd like to just re-emphasize what N.K. Venu is saying, that when Rajiv Gandhi introduced the defamation bill, we saw leading editors taking out a 4-kilometer march, and people should Google that. Just look at that picture. There's Khushwant Singh, there's Goenka, all of them. Where are these people now? And this is an important question, because we may win in the courts, but what we actually need is for the media fraternity to put up a much more common stand and also protest through physical action, not only through petitions. And this responsibility falls on the leading publishing houses. One looks at even the precedent of the Supreme Court with respect to the press cases, as they're called by lawyers. Who have they been filed by? The Indian Express Group, Sakal newspapers, or the Bennett and Coleman Group. These are what are the bedrock of press freedoms in India. And where are these people right now? Neither in court nor on the streets. So it does make us question. The third and the final point I'd just like to make very quickly here is that while we do think that the digital media ecology needs to be regulated, and this will be a difficult conversation, what we are looking at present is direct ministerial control. And this is dangerous not only for digital news media, but also for broadcast media. I'd like to emphasize that if you're unhappy with what's being shown on television, that same system of regulation or something very similar to that is being mimicked with respect to online news regulation today. And this is going to lead to outcomes where you will have the worst of all worlds: government censorial power, without satisfying the restriction of speech, which is possibly having fighting words or having elements of hate speech and demonizing communities, minorities.
Mr. Venu, do you think we're ready for the difficult conversation on regulation itself? Of course, we are against any sort of against government censorial powers, but is the digital media in India ready for that conversation about regulation, like Apar says? And if so, what kind of regulation would be acceptable?
See, Danya, it is even when we went to court, our generally our case as standalone born digital media, one way the government is also trying to sort of divide the media industry is by saying that the traditional media is already regulated by Press Council of India Act, and the traditional TV media is regulated by the Cable TV Network Act, and they've used the same logic. The IT Act used the same logic to keep newspapers in a very sort of artificial sort of way, keep newspapers out of the ambit of IT rules, and the exact electronic replica of the newspaper also has been kept out of the ambit. Right now, I am saying that and many petitions also said this is a highly irrational kind of division. Now, what a newspaper publishes, the online version publishes almost the entire content and probably more. So the two are sort of. I mean they are you cannot separate the two are the same, right? So what we today need is a comprehensive regulation where the online standalone digital media also is subjected to the current kind of regulatory system, like Press Council of India Act can be made little more can be refined a little more and be extended to online, and we are happy to discuss that. In fact, Danya, Niti Aayog, there is a Niti Aayog report which the Wire had reported, which had precisely recommended this. It said that online standalone online the new online digital news platforms can be brought under the existing self-regulatory systems which already exist. There is no need for government to come and bring in some like a ton of bricks, throw more regulation, intrusive regulation, bureaucrats telling us what to carry, what not to carry. So my case is the government should look at its own Niti Aayog report, and which to me appears reasonable. Within the existing sort of self-regulatory systems, if online can be dovetailed to govern online, I think it's a reasonable kind of solution as far as I'm concerned. And it is not our case that online news should not be regulated at all. And number two, Dhanya, this debate itself is redundant because this government, it really doesn't need a law to regulate media, because for every story, even normal stories, they are filing FIRs against journalists and publications. So they are resorting to the CRPC. So I mean, so routinely that it is ridiculous for them to argue that they need more instruments to regulate media. I think the chilling effect they have provided to Hazar existing laws, CRPC section 153. 505, sedition, criminal defamation, you name it. I mean, they have a huge, it's almost like a nuclear arsenal they have. So I don't know why they need some new laws in the form of IT Act to regulate media. I mean, if you...
Well, that's true. I mean, every kind of law is now being used against journalists. But I think the IT rules are also a way to weaponize grievances, and that's what the government is trying to do with this. I'm going to go to questions now. Namrata, if you want to take this, Meghnad is asking, do these new IT rules have a retrospective effect? Like, can someone object to an old movie and ask for it to be taken down from an OTT which is hosting it today? I mean, I would complain about a lot of movies then.
So when the rules were published in February, so the companies were given a 3-month period to comply. So in that sense, those compliances were definitely not retrospective. But as far as content is concerned, I don't think, and Apar can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there is any limitation on how far back you can go to raise issue with content, because the powers they don't have limitations, right? And that includes any limitation through period of time.
You can take an article from 1990, I mean, okay, digital. So let's say from 2005 from the Hindu and complain.
If it is still online and available for viewing to the public at large.
I would echo everything Namrata is saying. She's completely correct. There's no limitation in terms of time period. I think the legal ingredient necessary to attract enforcement is its availability or publication, which means it just needs to be online. So if you look at the phrasing, it's publish, 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 or available, available, available. So essentially, even for movies which may be like, but there'll be a tougher argument to make. I'll tell you why also. You know, like a lot of all the movies which have been released also have censor board certificates, right? And that is seen as a presumptive certification of the legality under the Cinematograph Act by itself as well. And so it will be a tougher argument to make, but you never know because the rules do not specify to this detail, which also shows that possibly even if they wanted to do these things, they could have done them a little more intelligently and with deliberation, but clearly not done.
But I thought the rules also allow like a super censor of OTT content other than what the censorship board does.
That is correct. However, under this, what I'm saying, the interrelationship between the Cinematograph Act and the existing rules is not very well established by itself. So a prior cinematographic certification by itself in certain instances, for instance, when it is telecast on television at a certain point in time was permitted, but thereafter under the cable television regulation rules, they said then certain certifications like for the A category need to be shown after this and this time. We have not reached that level of certainty, Danya. And you are right. There is power at present, and I am agreeing with Namrata, but I'm just saying that just to be fair and possibly, I don't want to use the word balanced, but what the hell balanced? From what I've seen in the past, the sensorial funnel sometimes is a little much more elongated in a sense. It's not very short. So you don't know what you can publish and what you cannot publish. So quite often there's no clear insight into what's legal and what's not legal. And this is a bigger risk I'd like to indicate to Meghnad and everyone who's watching, because when movies are made, they're made on the back of producers and the capital allocation which is done, right? And nobody wants to invest money into a project which will possibly not be telecast or taken down from an OTT platform at a future point in time because a Twitter hashtag ends up trending one day and their complaints sent, even if that same feature is certified for exhibition in broadcast or in cinema.
So basically, you're saying that these digital rules can also erode digital rights in a way that movie producers may decide not to make controversial subjects anymore because it's open to grievances and everybody's just going to weaponize grievances and keep complaining about that movie and perhaps try to take it down, right?
It's already happening. So there's a Mint report I remember reading a few months ago that several controversial titles have been dropped. And if people want to ask themselves why there are no contemporary movies about historical dramas, much more like in the 70s or the 80s, of course, we've seen now, because of the political environment, a lot of criticism about the period with respect to the emergency. But we have not seen that level of contemporary criticism, let's say, far back like 5 years of governance. Why is there only hagiographic kind of depictions of certain political personalities? It's because of things like this. And it really weakens the amount of cultural debate which is available in India. And this kind of shift also from much more narrative projects, like let's say adaptation of a Salman Rushdie novel, for instance, like Midnight's Children, etc., will really run into some kind of rough water. For instance, when we saw, I think the adaptation of A Suitable Boy, this also had a trend for a boycott, and boycott trends are done every second or third day. In fact, Danya, let me tell you, and let me end with this, that when we filed RTIs with the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, we found out that they were templatized and sent to the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting with respect to Tandav, having the same sentences, okay, and essentially calling for criminal penalties against the makers of Tandav. And this was done over a period of 3 days, corresponding with a Twitter ban trend. And immediately thereafter, you start noticing that this entire conversation about regulation of OTT platforms also starts creeping in.
Okay, so in the other question is from Aditya Raj, who's asking, how does this work? Do you have an officer? I'll just quickly explain. So all of us are supposed to have a grievance officer in office. This can be an employee or not an employee. That's the person who will look at the grievances. We send the reply. Now, if the complainant is not happy with the reply, they can then go to the next level. And then, of course, the third level, which is the interministerial committee, which has not been formed yet. So we are unsure of who is that particular committee. If I can go to Mr. Venu, before you logged in, Namrita was actually talking about how these rules could result in self-censoring of content by news organizations. What do you think are the dangers that these rules impose on all kinds of platforms? Other than self-censoring, the cost you have to incur, it's a blow on freedom of expression. But what else can you think of?
Well, I can, Dania, first of all, I think we must discuss this only after the cases are decided. At the moment, everything is stayed. What you're saying, all the three-tier system, everything stands stayed at the moment. So Rule 9 itself, as far as online news is concerned, Code of Ethics. So I think we should wait for the Supreme Court to take a call. My belief is that the Supreme Court will allow the Madras High Court to further hear the matter, although the government might hope that the Supreme Court bunches up everything. But the trend that we are seeing, whether it's in Madras High Court or in Bombay High Court or in Kerala, I have no doubt in my mind that this will be struck down. Prima facie, the courts have observed that this government has no business to create an oversight mechanism on news media. I think that has been established. As far as your question is concerned, if these mechanisms continue, media might as well shut shop and we go home. As you said, you've received 35 complaints or some. The political forces will organize every day some 500 complaints every day, and we'll have to within 24 hours acknowledging them, given our resources, and given and mind you, Dhanya, I want to make a larger comment on what media is going through. Post pandemic, the advertisement revenues of all media, even traditional media, which was trying to put itself in a different box as opposed to us, born digital media, but did not succeed, of course. 90%, 90% fall. 50% fall in ad revenues. There is a CMI data which has come, which says that 6 years ago there were 10.5 lakh journalists employed. 6-7 years ago, and today it is down nearly 85-90% employment. People have lost jobs. Media empires are closing down. Some of the leading traditional media brands are up for sale. Big capital is picking up media like you would pick up stuff from a supermarket. So that's what is going on. So given the situation, these rules would obviously already media economics is killing us. So these rules will basically finish off media, and I guess that is what the intention is. So
Well, that's what the government's intention is. Before I wrap up, I'll give a final comment to Namrata. Namrata, do you believe whether you talk about digital rights, whether you talk about freedom of expression, it's important that the court sends a message? You're muted.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you very well. Your question was, do I think it is important that the court sends a message? Yes, absolutely. I think it is important that the court sends a message because at the core of democracy is the system of checks and balances, right? And when we have the government overstepping, it is important that the court puts a rein on that power and checks that. But I'm also conscious that while we should peg our expectations on our judges, on judicial bodies, and we hope that they will deliver in the interest of protecting fundamental rights, at the end of the day, we should also continue to make demands from our government to withdraw these rules, because these are elected representatives and they also have a mandate to make sure that rights are strengthened and protected. So the short answer is yes, court should act, but all our expectations should not be pegged just on courts.
So don't peg all your expectations on the court. Both Venu and Apar mentioned about the protests against the Rajiv Gandhi government when there was a similar effort. So the voices against this digital rules has to come not just from the media fraternity, but I mean from the media fraternity as a whole, but from the people of this country too. Yes, Mr. Venu?
I just want to add, Danya, I was part of that protest which happened during Rajiv Gandhi's time. And I wish even now it's not late if journalists can come together and stage a similar, peaceful march, even at the risk of, sedition being put on them. So I don't put it past these people. Also, Danya, I also want to point out one thing. All the media companies which are part of the Digital News Publishers Association petition in Madras High Court, I asked some of their main anchors, TV, why are they not debating this on their 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock show? I had no answers. They hours and hours of airtime has been given to the confrontation between Twitter and the big tech and the government. But we as news media, we've not discussed our own issue. Even after winning, getting such good stays from the orders from the High Court, I don't see them these orders being discussed on TV. Why can't they call people like Apar or others and discuss positive developments? There is so much scare. I can't believe this. I mean, in my 37 years, I have not seen this kind of fear that has gripped the traditional media houses. I don't know what is it because of their economics, their survival. I don't know what is it. Why can't you discuss the Bombay High Court stay, which was the Madras High Court stay, which I thought was a fantastic order.
I mean, economics, fear, whatever it is. I think the saddest part is that media freedom is not the first priority for a lot of media houses, and it rightfully should be so. And maybe we will have a protest. Maybe something will be organized if and needed in the future. I hope so. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you very much, News Laundry, for the Media Rumble.